So, welcome back to our course on blockchain and its applications. So, till now we have covered most of the technical topics that we intended to discuss as a part of this course. So, in the last 6 lectures we are going to talk about how you can design a use case for blockchain and certain application aspects that you can think of where blockchain would be potentially interesting and those particular problems you would be able to solve with the help of blockchain. So, before going to that, let us first try to understand that what constitutes a good use case for applying blockchain, and today's lecture actually covered that part, that what can be the potential use cases of blockchain and to think of whether you can solve your problem with the help of blockchain or not, what questions you should ask yourself and you can think of putting up sufficient argument for establishing your logic of using blockchain for solving certain potential problems. So, these are the concepts that we are going to cover. We are broadly look into that what are the potential use cases of blockchain, and then we are going to discuss about what makes a good blockchain use case. So, these are the keywords. So, we are going to highlight the use cases for enterprises of blockchain, and then we are going to discuss in details the requirements which are there for defining a problem which can potentially be solved with the help of a blockchain. So, we are particularly going to look into the understanding that how you can constitute a blockchain network, who are the potential people who are going to use your blockchain based solution, what are the assets that you want to maintain with the help of blockchain, and what are the possible forms of transactions that you can define for your application that can be utilized or that can be logged on a blockchain based platform. Now, to start with, let us highlight some of the simple use cases by industry where people have already explored blockchain as a potential technology to solve the problems, and there are multiple startups, multiple companies who are there who have invested or designed solution to solve the particular problem in blockchain. So, obviously, as we discussed that the idea of blockchain became popular because of this concept of cryptocurrencies that actually in the financial domain. So, how you can do cross border trading with a digital currency that is not in the control of any government or any bank or any third party. Well, so that was the kind of source from where people have started thinking about blockchain. Now, the question comes that what can be the potential application beyond cryptocurrencies where we can possibly use blockchain, because as we already know that there are lots of debates which are going on cryptocurrencies. People are debating whether cryptocurrencies should be banned or not, and that is particularly because the legal aspect of cryptocurrencies, because it is something that is not trackable. You cannot track who is doing what with the help of cryptocurrencies. You cannot prevent potential malicious user. Maybe a terrorist can buy materials that can possibly be used for doing certain kind of terrorism or doing certain kind of attacks, and the government will have no way to track that who has actually brought that those materials. So, these are the kind of possible dangers of cryptocurrencies, and no government or no bank want to have a currency that is not controlled, that is completely open, because open market always brings certain kind of illegal activities. So, you can buy illegal items with the help of cryptocurrencies, and no one will be able to track you. No one will be able to even track that who is selling the items and who is buying the items. Well, so these are the potential danger associated with using cryptocurrencies, and that is why there are these legal aspects which are associated with cryptocurrencies. But as we mentioned earlier as well, that there are different other applications which are beyond cryptocurrencies, where you can apply idea of blockchain for developing different type of financial services. And in this context, these are the list of services where people have explored possible use of blockchains, like the trade finance, cross currency payments, mortgages, KYC, cross border tracks, and so on. So, in the context of trade finance, there are popular blockchain solutions like TradeLens and WeTrade. So, such kind of architectures which are such kind of platforms which are there, which are actually very much prominent. Different banks are part of it, which makes system automated with the help of a blockchain. So, you remember that for such kind of applications, when multiple banks are involved and you need to do the transactions from one bank to another bank, and every bank need to maintain their own asset. Well, so for such kind of applications, such kind of use cases, blockchains is very much suitable. Well, so later on we are going to discuss about how you can solve such kind of problems, such kind of applications with the help of blockchain, but these are some of the example use cases. Then another potential area where blockchain can be very useful are in the domain of public sector. Say for example, asset registration. So, in the next lecture we are going to discuss about land registration as a possible use case of blockchain, and then the citizen identity management. You have already learnt about the idea of distributed identifier, deeds, and self-sovereign identities. So, that kind of identity management solution can be used to maintain the identity information of the citizens of a country, and that way there can be a kind of verification of the identities and sharing of identity information. Obviously, these applications are kind of very much cross domain, that is related to KYC verification, automated KYC verification, and so on. And then we can have medical records where we can possibly help multiple different hospitals to share information among themselves. So, this is one of the potential use case of blockchain, where blockchain can be very much important in the context of medical record sharing, because as you already know that medical record is something like a very sensitive data. Well, so typically the governments or the hospitals do not want to share that data with others. Well, so one hospital will not agree to share the data with another hospital, but obviously if we can have a kind of common platform where everyone can share the data, then you can have solutions, you can have applications where you can use techniques like machine intelligence to learn pattern from that data, and have applications like automated diagnosis of diseases and so on. Well, that can be very helpful, but at the same time the problem comes that whenever you are going to think that, well, I am going to share the medical data from my territory, and that is something like a sensitive data. Okay, so that are the data that you have collected from your patients. So, people may not agree to share their private data with others. So, the question comes that how you can develop techniques to subvert such kind of difficulties which are having there in data sharing. So, in the machine intelligence domain, in the machine learning domain, people have developed techniques like say federated learning or distributed learning. Now, to do their distributed learning, blockchain can potentially be a backend or a kind of platform to support such kind of architecture, where blockchain can potentially log that, well, that can work like a front end, and from that front end it can log that, well, these are the applications which has accessed the data for this purpose at this amount of time, and so on. And you are actually not sending the data outside your boundary or outside your territory, rather you are doing certain kind of local computation on your system, and you are taking help of smart contract to export the outcome of that analysis on a blockchain based platform. So, for example, you want to extract certain patterns from a set of data. So, what you can do that, you can learn that, or you can run that local computation on your machine on your territory, and then whatever be the output from your execution, that information is getting exported in the form of a blockchain. So, that way you are not sending the raw data outside, rather you are doing partial computation, and that partially computed information is exported outside. So, that way the sensitive data is not getting out, rather the information out of the data is getting out with the help of a blockchain. And on blockchain you can track that for what purpose the data is getting accessed and who has accessed that data, what type of computation have been done on that data and so on. So, that way you can think of multiple different interesting applications in the medical domain, in the medical data shareability and in developing that e-medical, e-health applications with the help of such kind of blockchain based system. Also in the retail domain, blockchain have been well utilized. There are supply chains which is a kind of prominent example of blockchain. So, there are techniques or there are solutions like IBM Food Trust which uses blockchain to have a food supply chain architecture. And then there are other retail applications like the loyalty program, the information sharing among suppliers and retailers and so on. So, whenever there are multiple different parties who have a kind of common business goal, but they are kind of competitive to each other, they are competing with each other to meet their business goal, but if they can share the data among themselves, if they can share the information among themselves, all of them can potentially be benefited. For such kind of applications, you can utilize blockchain, and blockchain is potentially the more prominent use case for such kind of applications. Then in the insurance domain like claim processing, risk provenance, asset usage history, claims file. So, all these things can be automated with the help of blockchain, and as I mentioned that there are different startups who have explored blockchain for developing such kind of architecture, for developing such kind of solutions. And as I mentioned earlier that supply chain had been a prominent use case for blockchain. So, supply chain and logistics. So, there are multiple applications that can be developed on top of the entire end-to-end supply chain management architecture, and at the beginning of the course we have started our discussion by giving an example of a supply chain. If you remember that we talked about this petroleum supply chain at the beginning. So, with that we can have different kind of applications like supply chain financing, maintenance tracking, provenance, then supply chain compliance. All these things can be developed on top of a blockchain based architecture. So, there are, as I mentioned that there are plethora of applications where blockchains are useful, but the question comes that what you should think of to effectively utilize blockchain for such kind of applications. So, we can think of that we can use blockchain for such kind of applications, but from the implementation perspective they are not very straightforward. Well, it is not like that you can blindly take the data and put it over a blockchain and you are done. Well, it is not as simple as like this. So, there are multiple different things that you need to think of, you need to argue, you need to talk about before thinking or before deciding whether blockchain is potentially the best solution for these applications or not. So, what I would always say that there is no free lunch. So, every technology comes with its potential power as well as its own limitation. So, this analysis of power and limitations, that is very important for deciding whether that particular application best suits or that particular technology best suits for your use case or not. Well, so it might always happen that apparently you think of that well blockchain can be the best solution for your use case, but later on it might turn out that well by implementing your use case with the help of a blockchain, the amount of overhead that gets associated, that is much more compared to the benefit that you are getting with the help of a blockchain. If that is the case, then no one is going to use it. Well, so if you remember that whenever we talked about cryptocurrencies, so initially we had the cryptocurrency like eCash that was proposed, and we had a industry counterpart of it, but that was not very successful. That was by David Chaum. So, that was not very successful because people found that to use the digital cash, the amount of overhead that they have to think or they have to pay, that is much more compared to the benefit that they are getting. Well, so how frequently you are going to lose your money or how frequently you are going to get a torn note. So, it is not like that at every moment you are getting a torn note or every moment you are having a pickpocket. Well, so that was the kind of thing there, like although we understand the benefit of digital currency, but we also need to have a system that would ensure that well the benefit is much more compared to the overhead which is associated with the system. So, same applies to the blockchain. So, whenever you are thinking of designing certain application on top of blockchain, you also need to do such kind of trade off analysis, and we are going to learn in the next few lectures that how you can do such kind of trade analysis, or what are the different questions that should come in your mind whenever you are thinking of designing an applications with the help of blockchain. So, today I am just going to give you a kind of high level idea about what are the different questions you should ask yourself whenever you are thinking of to develop an use case or use blockchain for a potential solution of an application. As I mentioned that identifying a good blockchain use case is not always easy. Well, you will see that there are millions of research papers that talks about using blockchain for IoT, using blockchain for health record management, using blockchain for blah 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 and so on. But for many of the things, as we discuss in the next lectures and the subsequent lectures, that they have overlooked many of the things, and because of which those research papers are just like a research paper, and they are never have been the potential to get it applied in the real environment. Because whenever you are going to apply it on a real environment, you need to think of a lot of different things which are associated with your problem. Well, now to think of that what can be a potential blockchain use case, you need to concentrate on three things. So, the first thing is that you should have a business problem that need to be solved. Okay. So, the business problem means there need to be a kind of business network. Well, and the business problem that you are going to solve, that cannot be more efficiently solved with other technologies. So, this is somewhere I want to point out, because we have seen in the last few years that people are thinking of applying blockchain for certain problems where we could have potential much more potential technologies that could work better. Well, so blockchain is not the optimal solutions for those problems, and we are going to see such kind of problems in the subsequent lectures. But the thing is that this is something very important, that you need to think or you need to argue that blockchain is something that is the only solution or that is the best solution for the business problem that you are talking about. Well, so that is the kind of first requirement. The second requirement is that you should have an identifiable business network. Well, so blockchain is a decentralized solution, it works over a network. Well, if you just think of implementing something on your room with the help of blockchain, that is complete unnecessary and overkill of the technology. Well, because in your room everything is your control. Well, so when everything is under your control, you do not need a blockchain. So, you only need a blockchain whenever you are going to collaborate with someone else, and at that case both of you find out that well, there is no trusted third party who can potentially manage your problem, which can potentially manage your data. Well, so whenever there is a kind of identifiable business network with associated participants, assets and transactions, then only you should think about applying blockchain for that particular problem. The third requirement is there is a need for trust. So, well, we always keep on talking that well, blockchain provides a secure architecture. That is true in one hand, but at the other hand, the major benefit comes from blockchain is like we are bringing inherent trust in the system. So, you do not have the concept like a trusted third party. Well, so you are not trusting anyone else for doing your job. So, for example, whenever you are running something on a cloud based system, you are actually relying on the cloud service provider. You are trusting the cloud service provider that the cloud service provider is not stealing your data. Well, so that way a trust is associated with that. So, for example, whenever you are purchasing something from an e-commerce website, you are trusting the corresponding seller, or you are trusting the corresponding e-commerce website that they are going to. So, if you are going to buy a smartphone from that e-commerce website, you are going to get a smartphone and not a set of bricks. Well, so this is something that is there in your mind. You are whenever you are going for a business deal, you are trusting the other party that what the other party is actually claiming, that claim is correct. But blockchain provides you an interface where there is a question on that trust. You cannot, if you cannot blindly trust someone else, then blockchain is the potential solution for those kind of problem. If you find that well you have a trusted third party in your architecture who can help you to do that. Say for example, if it is something like that, well say all the hospitals under government, well they want to share the data among themselves. Well, now if all the hospitals under the government wants to share the data among themselves, all of the hospitals are managed by the government, and government is a potential trusted third party, because this hospital authority, they need to trust the government. Well, so if they do not trust government, then that society cannot run. Well, so you need to at least trust your government. So if the hospital are under the government control, then the government can potentially set up a data repository where all the hospitals is going to put up their data. Well, so when for such kind of architecture you really do not need a blockchain. So the requirement for blockchain comes say when there are multiple other private hospitals, say one hospital which is under say X, another hospital which is where the authority is say Y, and so on. If that is the kind of case, then you need to think of that, well these two are the business competitors, Mr. X and Mr. Y are the business competitors, and it might happen that to make their business more profitable, Mr. X sends some wrong information to Mr. Y or cheat Mr. Y or vice versa. If that is the case, then blockchain is potentially provide a solution for those kind of problems. So this way the need for trust is the important aspect, and that trust can come through consensus, can come through immutability, can come through consensus finality or provenance, whatever property a blockchain typically supports. Now the first requirement, that understanding the business problem. Well, so you should ask this set of questions to yourself to understand the business problem. First, what is the specific business problem or challenge that the project will address? Well, so you need to put the scope of the business challenge up front. Well, then what is the current way of solving this business problem? So if a problem exists, then there would be certain potential solution to solve that problem. It cannot happen that there is no solution. It might happen that the solution is not so good, the solution is ad hoc, the solution is something that we call as jugaad. So that can always happen, but it is not like that there is no solution of that problem. Well, so you need to clearly study that what is the current way of solving that problem. Well, and then third requirement is that assuming that the business problem is large, what specific aspects of this business problem will be addressed. Well, so you cannot solve everything on a day, you are going to solve a part of it. So you should ask the question that which part of it I am going to solve. Well, so that is important thing to explore. The second requirement is that after you have understood the business problem, the second requirement is to understand the participant of that business. Well, so who are the business network participants or organizations, and what are their roles? Well, so if there is no business network involved, then it is not a good use case for blockchain, as I have mentioned earlier. So you cannot simply run blockchain for the IoT devices which are deployed in your room. You can just think of a potential application that I have multiple different IoT devices. I have Amazon Alexa, I have the smart door lock, I have the smart lights, I have the smart AC, smart fan, and so on, and I would connect all of them with the help of a blockchain. So that is a kind of extremely bad use case for blockchain, because all of those devices are ultimately in your control, and when all of these devices are ultimately in your control, then you do not need a blockchain for solve that problem. You need a business network to solve the problem. So you need to understand the key users in your business network. So to understand the participants, so you need to ask these questions to yourself, that who are the participants, how many different types of participants that I have. It might happen that I have different kind of participants. For example, in an e-commerce website, you have these buyers, the sellers, at least these two broad group of participants. then how will they access and interact with the blockchain? So, this is very important. Well, so in many of the cases I have seen that people just think of that, well, I will take this data and put it on the blockchain. But the question comes that how the individuals are going to interact with the blockchain, what is going to be the interface that you are going to use on top of blockchain. Okay. Then the participants that are there, will they be peer nodes? Well, if it happens that, well, they are not the peer in a overlay network, then you cannot run blockchain there. Well, so do you need web apps or mobile apps? Are gateways needed? Do you need to integrate to external data sources? Well, so whenever you are integrating the external data sources, then you need to think of about interoperability and all these different aspects of blockchain. Then comes the important question that who will operate the blockchain? Well, so it is not like that magically it will happen. Well, so someone need to build that solution, someone need to manage that solution, need to distribute with other, need to bring the participants on the system and so on. Well, so this is a very important question, that who will operate the blockchain and who will govern and regulate the blockchain. Okay? Because you need to also ensure that whatever information that individuals are claiming, that informations are also correct and people are not putting up certain junk information in the blockchain. And the information that are getting inserted in the blockchain, they are publicly verifiable. If you are just putting an information that is not publicly verifiable, then there is no potential use case of blockchain. So, let me give you an example in this context. In many of the use cases, I have seen that, well, people are taking the data from a sensor and putting that data on the blockchain. Well, again, that is a kind of stupid use, I would say a stupid use case for blockchain, unless you are thinking of that how to validate that data. Well, so when certain data is being generated on the blockchain and you are putting that data on a blockchain, generate from a sensor and putting that data on a blockchain, on what basis you are going to validate that data? Well, so you need to have a kind of strong validation logic. You need to say that, well, this sensor has generated certain data which is of potential interest. Well, and that particular generated data is the correct data. Well, not a data which has been generated by some external attacker who has taken a control of that sensor node and generated some falsified data. So, how you are going to validate that data? Well, so as we seen earlier that the financial transactions can be validated by looking into the history, but sensor data, can I validate it by looking into the history? So, we need to ask these questions ourselves. So, unless you have a way to validate the data, that is not at all a potential transaction that you can include within a blockchain. Then comes another important question, that what is the value or incentive for each participant to join the network? Well, so unless you have certain kind of value or incentive associated with it, people are not going to join on that new platform. There need to be certain incentive. So, that need to be thought of, that need to be designed. Then comes the important aspect of identities. So, do you need to know who are your users? Well, say for example, the pseudo anonymous blockchain like Bitcoin, they does not require user identities to be verified. But on the other hand, in most of the business use cases, some form of identity is required. If it is a public blockchain, there is an identity oracle like linked to a trusted database that could provide such information sources. Well, these sources can come from governments, financial institute or utility providers. So, for example, for your Aadhaar verification, you need to rely on the government database. Well, and in private blockchains, a gateway or controller ensures that the identity is verified before credentials are issued to the user. Well, and in that context, we have seen that there are ways to do identity verification in a decentralized way. So, we have learnt about the concept of decentralized identity management. Well, and that may be the preferred way for such kind of private blockchain applications. Then comes the important requirement of understanding the assets and transactions. Well, so you need to ask this question, that what assets are involved and what is the key information associated with the asset. Well, so the example that I have given here, that you cannot simply put up the sensor data from a room temperature sensor and put it over the blockchain, that would be a stupid use case. Well, so that sensor data is not actually a kind of very strong asset that you need to maintain with the help of a blockchain. Well, so you need certain meaningful information that you can put up on a blockchain that can be verified by others. So, if a sensor that is being put in this corner of the room and it takes up certain data and put it up on the blockchain, there is no way to verify that this corner of the room has that temperature. Well, if it is beyond certain threshold, that like if the sensor says that the room temperature at that corner is 100 Celsius. So, that is possibly wrong, but you do not know. It might happen that certain fire has caught at that corner and it is sensing that data. Well, and then sensors are also inbuilt faulty. So, that can be multiple things that might happen. So, you cannot reliably say that data is something which is legitimate, which carry certain important information that you can store on the blockchain. Well, then the second question is that what are the transactions involved? Well, and between whom, and what assets are associated with such kind of transactions. Well, so you need to understand under what business or contractual conditions assets are under as they transfer from one owner to another. So, how that asset transfer is happening on top of your business network. Then comes defining transactions, like what type of processes need to take place in your blockchain network, like that can be invoke actions like add, delete, change, transfer. Well, so that can be the possible actions that you want to take, and there can be associated transactions. There can be certain queries that you are making on a blockchain network. Well, so the thing is that do you need to control access to this function based on participant type or rules? Well, so is it like that you want to make everyone to add or delete something on your blockchain or not? Well, so based on that your design would be. You need to design the system accordingly and from that perspective. So, there are few other additional points that also you need to think of, like what are the main steps in the current workflow and how are these executed by the business network participants. Then what is expected benefit of applying blockchain technology to the business problem for each of the network participants. So, that is very important. So, you need to understand that what benefit the participants are getting. Is the benefit is same for all the participants, or different participants are getting benefited in a different way. If there is a kind of differential treatment, then such kind of differential treatment, whether it is going to be important or whether that is going to have certain kind of adverse effect on your system or not. And what legacy systems are involved, what degree of integration with the legacy system is needed. So, these are the kind of interesting questions, are the important questions that you need to ask for defining a potential blockchain use case. So, in conclusion, what we have seen today in this lecture, that we need to think carefully before applying blockchain directly on a problem. Well, we need to carefully think of that, do we really need to use blockchain, and what are the pros and cons of using blockchain to solve this problem. As I have mentioned that this trade-off analysis is very important. Well, if you blindly apply blockchain for certain problem, it might happen that the overhead which is associated with it is much more compared to the benefit that you are getting. Well, and you need to also think of, can there be a better technology? Can I use a central database? Do I have access to a trusted third party? If I have access to a trusted third party, then that centralized solution is the best. I do not need decentralized all the time. It is not like that I need to distribute or decentralize everything. So, it is directly a myth. So, we have a myth that centralized is very bad and distributed is very good. Well, and believe me, that is just a myth. There are many cases where centralized work much more better compared to a distributed system. For having a decentralized or a distributed architecture, you need to think of the use cases, or you need to think of the applications where actually the centralization is not possible. Well, so to argue against centralization, many of the time we put up an argument that, well, it is having a single point of failure. But single point of failure does not mean anything. Well, so because we have replicated database, we can say, so for example, whenever we are keeping data to a government server, do you think that it is a single server? It is not a single server. Well, it uses some kind of technologies like RAID, there are replicated database, there are even geo-replicated database, there are disaster management systems which are associated with it. So, that if the system fails, even one system fails, you have a backup system from where they would be able to provide you the data. Well, so that way single point of failure does not mean anything. You need to really think of whether single point of failure is important, or you have sufficient backup support to subvert that single point of failure or not. Well, So, that way it is very important to do such kind of analysis. Well, and finally, that we need to think of that, can we define the entities like the business network, the participant, assets and the transactions and so on. So, if you think of by doing all this analysis that well, blockchain is potentially the best solution for this use case, then go for it, otherwise think of what can be the potential technology for your application. So, this particular lecture give you an idea that how you can or what you should think of or what you need to think of before applying blockchain for a potential use case. And in the next lecture, we are going to look into one such use case and going to do such kind of critical analysis on that use case to see whether we can develop a blockchain based solution to solve that problem or not. Well, so that is all for this particular lecture. See you all in the next lecture. Thank you.